This is Weights and Wealth, your one-stop shop for entertaining education on building a stronger body and bank account.
We are not doctors or financial advisors and must warn you this is not medical or investing advice. It is for your entertainment. Welcome back to Weights and Wealth, your number one faith, family, freedom, fitness, and finance podcast. Today, we're going to do a little bit of a different episode. We'll be talking all about current events.
Yeah, let's get it. This episode is being recorded on April 27th. So depending on when you're listening to it, it'll be a few days old, about a week old. But we'll roll. We don't usually get to do current events because of how we record this, recording like 8 to 16 episodes at a time, and then dispersing them throughout the next few months. But Sean is not going to be with us for a few of the episodes coming up. Nick and I are here in Charleston recording some episodes. Sean's going to zoom in on Riverside for a few of these. He is currently, his wife's due date was 5 days ago, so he can't be here right now, but he is zooming in for a few. Okay, and I did spill some water about 10 minutes ago, so Soggy Sock Gang is back.
Back and better than ever. So for our shout out today, we got Alex from Clarksville, Tennessee, for participating in the March Madness pool and sharing the show with his office. So thank you, Alex, and continue sharing the good news. You know, this might not be the gospel, but it's a close second.
Wait, who won the March Madness pool? Do we know?
A different Alex won the March Madness pool. My wife won. She knows nothing about college basketball. So
that sounds like
that's typically how it goes with those March Madness brackets. All right. We don't have any intro articles today because we have a lot of articles throughout the episode.
We do need the wealth wisdom, though.
Oh, wealth wisdom. All right.
This is very basic, but slow and steady wins the race. And our first current event is, pause, Boden Coin. So we'll be talking about Boden Coin. Pause. So this is obviously a very high risk asset. Any altcoin is going to be extremely risky. So your best way to kind of go about you're right, Ted?
Yeah, it's just so bad.
All right. Is to just, kind of go slow and steady. There's this new meme coin, J.O. Boden. I don't know, Sean knows more about it.
Yeah.
But it's Boden Coin.
It's like if everyone remembers Dogecoin from back in the day, it's kind of the new iteration of that. Obviously, there's no inherent value other than it just being silly, but it has made multiple people millionaires off of small investments. Generating over 100 times return in a single day. But
crypto is so stupid.
This is like the one in a million, meme coins that goes positive.
It's basically like playing the lottery.
Yeah, that's how these altcoins go.
Yeah. It's 100% a lottery pick, and but it's just very humorous. It's like a very, very poorly drawn version of Joe Biden that kind of looks like a worm with hair, and everything is just misspelled on purpose. We'll post some of the Geo Boden memes that have been taking the internet by storm
recently.
When we post this episode, just because they are quite silly and funny, but it's kind of a spin-off almost of these other just goofy meme pages like Erupting.
It's a throwback.
And Rat.
It's a throwback to almost like the start of memes. I remember when I was in middle school on Twitter, these memes of Spoderman started blowing up, and it's the same exact thing, the same drawing style, and it is the same meme. What is it now? 15 years later, internet stays undefeated.
Yeah. And I mean, these,
it's good stuff.
Sometimes these meme coins, I'm sure there have been more, but the article has Dogecoin and Shiba as well, and like those are two of the other meme coins that have just exploded.
Yeah,
at a point.
And like we said, this is definitely not an intelligent investment that anybody should make, because more likely than not, you're going to lose all the money that you put into it. But as far as current events, it's just the reason we're featuring it is because individuals showed up to a Trump rally holding these Joe Biden signs, Geo Boden signs, and it got covered by several mainstream articles, like mainstream publications. So we just thought it was, financially related, funny, and worth giving a couple minutes to.
Sean, do you want to take us? Do you want to take us into the Russian troops now?
Here, one more thing for those of you who are understanding why we are saying pause. Please comment on either YouTube or wherever else you can, or DM us on Instagram, and you very well may win a gift card.
Yeah, you might be the monthly raffle winner.
Yeah.
All right, Sean, you want to?
Well, I certainly won't win that, so I must be outside the joke right now. But yeah, in other current events, the Zarya Battalion in Luhansk, which is the easternmost province of Russia. I was just scrolling through Twitter the other day, and being in the military as an infantry officer, and Ted as well. Generally, I tend to follow developments in like current conflicts and stuff like that. And I thought it was super interesting to see these separatist soldiers. So they're Ukrainian citizens that are aligned with Russia. So in some ways, this Ukraine conflict is almost like a civil war, but they're kind of an irregular unit, not like officially part of the Russian army. And since, this breakaway province of Ukraine is not like officially a state, you can't really call them like normal, like line soldiers. And apparently they've been using motorcycles to evade the drones. So most people who have been following the Ukraine war have been seeing these, small commercial drones, used with pretty devastating effects. Whether it's on dismounted infantry formations or even on like mechanized platforms such as, BMPs, the T-90, the T-72. The Ukrainians and the Russians now have both been able to use these remotely controlled drones to be able to drop munitions or use them as like a suicide bomb, like a suicide drone, to go drive into a trench, a building, a vehicle, and blow it up remotely without, risking that soldier's life. So you got to think about it like a remote control grenade almost, or a remote control bomb of some type that they can drive around, see things, and then go target their enemy. And so like these light infantry soldiers in the Zarya Battalion have been using motorcycles to more effectively evade these kind of killer drones. They claim to be very effective, and it was like a 5-minute video, all in Russian and Ukrainian. I'm no expert on the Cyrillic languages, and there were no subtitles, but basically it was just an interview with a couple soldiers, and then what seemed to be like their commanding officers, and then they showed some footage of soldiers going across these massive areas that like kind of like rolling hills and plains, and they would have like 2 guys per motorcycle, and they would just basically use that to move from cover to cover. And when you're in a large, slow moving armored vehicle that's vulnerable to these drone strikes, it seems like they're substituting armored protection for speed and maneuverability. They claim to have had, a good amount of success with it. Obviously, I'm not an expert, but it is an interesting tactic, and, something that, kind of applies in many different areas of life, that deregulation, these guys being a kind of paramilitary formation and not, an official government entity, it kind of allows more innovation. So these guys are kind of unsupervised in a way, And so they just found some motorcycles or tactically acquired them, and they've been able to use them to great effect. And it's always interesting to see new ways of doing things, and it kind of makes you wonder about like what the future of warfare looks like as the 21st century continues to heat up. I don't think anything's going to calm down for a while. And, I'm wondering when we're going to get our motorcycle units at this point.
Well, the Army has some policies against motorcycle driving because of the the deaths correlated with it stateside. So maybe they'll never allow that. I don't know. But
I do know that some special operations groups do utilize them from time to time. It's not like a regular thing, but they do use that and vehicles such as like kind of like a more tactical version of a side-by-side or ATVs. So it's kind of an interesting way of, like seeing these, the first really like peer-to-peer conflict that's occurred in decades, and how like these large, tanks and armored personnel carriers are kind of being, almost like rendered like neutralized by these like cheap commercial drones that can be loaded with a pretty heavy payload, and then taking out these multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment with $100.
It's cool to see. It's cool to see the evolution, though. And when you study military history, if you look at when the machine guns came out, they had no idea what to do. They would just charge everyone at it, and then they started to adapt. It's just kind of like the history of warfare, adapting to these new things and changing strategy. So I think it's definitely cool to see that play out in real time like this. And also, Sean, you mentioned Luhansk. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but you should be Nikki Haley's foreign policy advisor because you know more Ukrainian provinces than she does. Moving on, the kind of strategy innovation here, going back and forth. Sean mentioned trading armor and strength essentially for speed and maneuverability. That's kind of been the way of the NFL in the past few years. You see with like McVay and Miami revolutionizing the NFL offense and kind of turning a new page. The NFL draft just happened. Some surprising things happened. Sean's going to tune out for this segment since he's an anti-sports guy. But
I'm not anti-sports. I just don't have the bandwidth for it. And I've got too many other things going on to care about. But
we'll cover the draft super quick.
Millionaires getting to play with balls.
Cover the draft super quick. Nick, the most surprising thing I saw in round one was Penix getting taken at 8. I thought he was
because they have Kirk, right?
Yeah, they have Kirk Cousins, who they just signed and owe a couple $100 million. Yeah, I think it's $180 million.
Which apparently he was pretty pissed off about that move.
Yeah, I mean, being a Green Bay fan, I've seen this with going from Favre to Rodgers and him sitting for 3 years, and then Jordan Love, same deal. It's interesting to see another team in the NFL finally adapt that strategy because it is so successful.
Yeah, I mean, nobody thought Love was going to be doing what he's doing right now, and that could be because he trained
learned from the GOAT.
Yeah. Well, GOAT. I don't know.
And then another thing, I thought this was hilarious. So I went on Twitter during the NFL draft as I was working on the outline, and so many memes. I was shocked. I was just expecting to see like coverage of it, and I just was seeing all these memes. And one of them was, so for those that don't know, for different positions in the NFL, different types of people play the different positions. You got your linemen, usually super big guys, 350 pounds. For some positions, you see more of like a race difference. So there's like this ongoing joke in the NFL about how white people can't play cornerback, which is the guy crossing the wide receiver that runs with him and defends the wide receivers essentially. And so there hasn't been like a starting white cornerback of note in, I don't know, a couple decades maybe. So this guy from Iowa, Cooper DeJean, was projected to be a first-round pick, and he got taken in the second round last night. But someone tweeted a picture of him and said, "This is our Jackie Robinson." I thought it was hilarious.
I mean, the Eagles need a secondary.
Yeah,
so.
Nick's an Eagles fan. The Eagles drafted him one step. They traded up to be one pick ahead of the Packers to grab him. I think the Packers might have grabbed him. So
yeah.
But
the only other thing I want to talk about this is, what do you think about Bauer's landing spot at the Raiders?
a lot of people for fantasy football were kind of like freaking out about it. They wanted Bowers to go somewhere where he'd be featured. If you look at the Raiders, it's actually a good spot because they drafted Michael Mayer early last year, but he's more of a blocking guy. He's not the fastest guy. Like that was, and he was scoring points at the end of last year, but he's not super fast. So if you put Bowers there, you can run a like a 12 formation, have two tight ends, and Mayer. Or you can just have Mayer's blocking. He'll probably wind up doing more blocking, and I expect them to have two tight ends on the field quite a bit. But Devontae's 31. He'll probably be done in a couple of years. Maybe he gets traded. The only other guy they've really got there is Jacoby Myers. So Bowers can easily become the number one target there, kind of like a Travis Kelce in like the next 2 years. So I actually don't think it's a bad landing spot fantasy-wise if you play fantasy football like Nick and I do.
The only issue is the quarterback.
Gardner Minshew's good at spreading the ball around. He did well with the Colts last year. He did well with the Eagles, and he's with them. So I'm not too concerned.
I think he's one of those that's a good backup quarterback, but I don't know about starting the whole season.
Yeah. He's no Kirk or something like that where it's like a really good quarterback. But yeah, I don't think it's that bad for those that play fantasy. If the guys in our league that listen to this, I guess just gave them a little heads up on my draft strategy.
Well, that's why I was asking, because you have 3, I have 4.
Yeah, Nick's right behind me in the draft.
I'm fine with getting MHJ, Neighbors, Odunze, or Bowers. So, and then there's a big drop off, I think, to 5.
After that, yeah, definitely. All right. Well, moving on, since not everyone's interested in football.
I do have a question regarding the draft. What was the highest contract? You guys know off the top of your head?
Money? I don't know.
Google it quick.
Yeah, go. Yeah, I know.
Never
So
my hotspot's
the
off.
way the rookies. Okay, well, we won't worry about it. But how it works is the guys that get drafted in the first round, and it scales down as the picks keep going down. You get a lot more money and a lot more guaranteed money. But the rookie contracts are very small compared to the veterans that re-sign,
and not as high as the NBA. I think the NBA is far and above higher.
Because there's so many more players on an NFL team and they play less games. So, all right. Well, let's move on. Pause. To the Biden billionaire minimum tax on unrealized capital gains.
Yeah. The reason I asked about the NFL draft was their compensation was because these people are likely going to be very affected by this tax. If it goes
good.
It's a proposal at this point. I really don't see it probably passing. It's just essentially Biden proposes a new tax on unrealized capital gains on households worth over $100 million. And this article is from taxfoundation.org. So under the new proposal, households with net wealth over $100 million would be required to pay a minimum effective tax rate of 20% on an expanded measure of income that includes unrealized capital gains.
Yeah, wait.
Households...
Can we pause there? Unironically pause there? Because I just kind of want to go piece by piece with this, and we can talk about the small parts as we go.
Yeah. Nick, do you want to explain unrealized capital gains for people that don't know?
Sure. So it's essentially when you hold an asset and that asset's marketable value goes up. So the unrealized gain, it could be on anything. They're mainly talking probably about stocks. So, if you buy a stock for $10, it's currently worth $12. You haven't sold it yet. You have an unrealized gain of $2. So that's what unrealized gain is. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, Sean, but there's just a lot here, and I just want to go through piece by piece. And then in a minimum effective tax rate of 20%, so we already have a minimum tax for very wealthy people. It really only applies to them because capital gains are taxed at a lower rate than ordinary income is, which I think is messed up because you're taxing people who are working for their money more than people who are just sitting back investing, collecting money from that. And the alternative minimum tax is currently at 25% already. And it treats different types of income in a different way than the normal tax rate does. But that doesn't include unrealized gains. So so that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about before you went on.
Okay. Yeah.
So
no, that makes sense. All right.
The biggest. Go.
If you want to, if you have something to add, you should.
No.
I'll put like a paragraph here to.
If you're still going on this 100 million, keep going with that, and then I'm going to go into the next part of this.
Yeah, so maybe start at the beginning again. Sorry, just
okay.
Or what if we read it one time through and then we can go back through it?
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
All right. So under the new proposal, households with a net wealth of over $100 million would be required to pay a minimum effective tax rate of 20% on an expanded measure of income that includes unrealized capital gains. Households would calculate their effective tax rate for the minimum tax, and if it fell below 20%, would owe additional taxes to bring their effective rate to 20%. In other words, households would owe taxes on capital gains each year, even if the underlying asset had not been sold, and amounts would be treated as prepayments of future capital gains tax liability.
It's so bad.
It's
way to shoot investors even in the foot, like straight in the head. This is just a terrible idea.
I'm just imagine that you have your house, right? And it's worth $100,000. And then, maybe they build a new hospital nearby and, your property value goes up by $50,000. Now you owe the government money on that. And maybe that's your only asset. Maybe you don't have stocks. Maybe you're self-employed and I'm just imagining this, people having to sell off their assets to pay the tax because they don't make enough money, from their W-2 job to actually pay the taxes. I can't think of yes, it's on households with a net worth of over 100 million, but
Okay, so the other part of this is it gets worse. It's also it starts for people worth over $400,000. It starts at 39.6% capital gains tax. We're not talking about unrealized capital gains. There's also just a straight capital gains tax for over $400,000. Starts at 39.6% and then goes all the way up to 44.6% over $1 million. So this would absolutely kill the startup and exits on businesses. So now you're not going to have anyone trying to create a business. Okay, imagine this. We're here in Charleston. It's hot here. People need their HVAC repaired. So HVAC's pretty good business to get into, pretty good trade. Okay, you start a HVAC business and you have 4 trucks and your business is worth $1.2 million. You work 30 years. You have this small business you've created. You plan on retiring by selling the business once you want to retire. Sell it to a young guy that's come up working in HVAC and wants to buy your business for the clientele, marketing, all that stuff. He says he'll buy it for $1.2 million, and that's what you're going to retire on. Okay, well, now you have to pay 44.6% of that to the government. So now that $1.2 million
basis in your company, so it wouldn't necessarily be 1.2. It could be far less than 1.2, depending on your basis in your company. Your basis is so. Honestly, I'll be honest. From what you guys are saying, it doesn't sound that bad to me, for many different reasons. The one about increasing the capital gains rate, I think it's pretty messed up right now how capital gains rates are so much lower than ordinary rates, because you're penalizing people that are working for their money, not people that are just, getting dividends, because dividends are taxed at 20%. Whereas the max rate right now for dividends is 23.8% if you include the net investment income tax. The max rate for somebody who's working for their money is 39%.
Okay, but we're not just talking about stocks here. So I disagree with what you're saying, because we're not just talking about people who quote unquote aren't working for their money. Pause. We're also talking about people that have worked for their money by creating a business over the course of 20, 30 years and are now trying to sell it. That would also be taxed. It's not just stocks here. Like selling that business taxed at 44.6%. Like,
no, well, okay, I don't necessarily agree with that because there's the 100 million. Because I think
but the 100 millions for the unrealized. There's the separate 44.6% for just normal capital gains.
Okay.
This isn't for unrealized capital gains.
I do think the capital gains rate should increase so we can bring down the income tax rate. Like assuming the amount of tax dollars collected has to stay the same, I think we should up the capital gains rate and then lower the ordinary rate.
One, I think that's a poor assumption. I think...
Well, no, I'm saying for this discussion, because that's a separate discussion. Right. It's talking about how much the government should tax people. I still think increasing capital gains is not a good idea because humans follow incentives. So what you tax, you'll get less of. If you're taxing people starting up and selling businesses, you're going to get less of it. This is right. I agree with that.
Totally the opposite of the American dream. Not only that, people that have worked all their lives to build businesses, now when they sell that business to retire, because a lot of times if people have a small business like this, they're not putting money away in the stock market like a normal W-2 employee because they have a different investment strategy. So if they haven't put money in the stock market because they've been investing back into their business and now their financial planning was to sell their business to retire off of, now you're taxing them at this super high rate, which when you add state taxes in could be 55, 60%.
Right.
Like you are, it's just such a horrible business killer. It's just the worst proposal ever.
No, well, because while they're working throughout their entire life, they're being taxed at ordinary rates. So if we were to be able to bring the ordinary rate down, they could then funnel more money into their business or put more money on the side and then have a larger pile of cash when they do retire.
Yeah, I mean, that's the nice idea, but when has the government ever been like, hey, let's reduce tax rate and actually do it effectively? Yeah, they'll propose tax cuts, but like,
I mean,
sometimes they're only temporary. Or
I like this. I like that we're disagreeing because usually on the show we're all in agreement. I really like this.
No, ever since FDR introduced the income tax, it was supposed to be temporary. It was supposed to be to fund the war.
Yep.
Well,
and then they decided I actually really like taking everybody's money.
It was actually during the Civil War that they started the income tax temporarily, got rid of it, and then they restarted it back up.
Can we pause?
Had it.
For our thing that's coming out July 8th about the amendments.
Yes.
One of my amendments is there shall not be a tax based on income.
Yes.
So we're just, this is for working within our current system. We have an idea for a better system, but this is to work within our current
And if you missed the episode that we did where we brought Chris Nahibi on for the first half of the episode and did an interview with him, it was a really great discussion. It got into this as well, income tax and how the government shouldn't need to income tax, and I forget exactly what episode that is, but if you scroll back a little bit, look for that episode with Chris Nahibi. I'll link it if you're watching.
I mean, it's a really scary stat. It's just like people always wonder, like, oh, well, how is the government going to pay for roads? How is it going to pay for schools? But like all the money that the government takes in right now, the federal government, is spent on servicing the interest on the debt. It's not actually used to fund anything. So.
Because they've driven up the deficit so much with spending. Another thing here within this discussion, since we're talking about taxes and the assumption that tax would have to stay the same for the government to bring in the same amount of revenue, the fact that we call it revenue for the government is horrible language. I mean, like, the government is there to serve the people, but what we've come to now with such a large, bloated federal government, I think the number's somewhere around 13 million people in a population of 330. I don't know how many of that how much of that population is in the workforce. Let's call it 200 million. So if you have 13 million out of that 200 million, 6.5% that are part of the federal government, does the federal government work for us, or do we work for the government giving them revenue through taxes? It's just like, I feel like it's just It's almost too far gone. Like
I'm loving this discussion, but I think we could do a whole separate episode, like the great tax rate debate or something like that.
All right.
Because this is a current events focus. I'm loving the discussion. Though I don't know if you guys wanted to say anything more.
I'm good. I can move on.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we covered what we needed to cover with that. Just keep in mind that it's just a proposal at this point, and I haven't seen any evidence of legislation like officially introduced to the House regarding it. But the fact that this is like something that they thought was a good idea to like put out publicly.
Biden said he would do this. Biden said he would do this when he was running in 2020.
Okay.
Sad.
Can I say one last thing?
Yeah.
And then you guys can respond, obviously. So I think I would need to fact check this, but I'm pretty sure that so in America, the top 1% pay a lot in taxes and a very high tax rate. Once you start getting to like the 0.0001%, they pay a lower tax rate than a lot of middle class.
Yeah, this was actually big in the Trump-Hillary debates back in 2016. Like they asked a question about how Trump used tax loopholes to not pay income tax through his real estate businesses. And he was like, yeah, I do that. So do all of Hillary's donors. Like that's what all the wealthy people do, because why wouldn't you do it? The government doesn't spend your money well. They just give all of it to Ukraine and pay interest on the debt.
Yeah. So. And you can't blame people for following the tax code. Like I know when Trump's tax returns came out, it was like a big thing. Like what is he supposed to do? Be like, I owe this much, but I'm just going to give the government an extra $2 million. No, he's working within the system that has been set up by these politicians, which is why we want to change the system. But we're just, kind of postulating about this.
All right, moving on. What's our next? Erupting protests on campuses. Is that? All right. So Sean, you go ahead.
Yeah, it's just with the Israel and Palestine conflict going on. A lot of student groups around the U.S. Have been, doing like sit-ins, or like what they call them, or like die-ins.
They're like camping. They're setting up tents.
They like basically go sit on the lawn, or like go like sit in the main building of whatever college they're at, and basically kind of just be there protesting the conflict in a variety of ways. Sometimes they're protesting their university's involvement with federal contractors like Lockheed Martin. Like let's say University of Texas has a good relationship with a defense contractor. They're probably protesting that. I know that at my alma mater, Notre Dame, they're doing something like that right now. And I saw a couple of signs that were talking about like get Lockheed Martin out of Notre Dame. Like, Notre Dame is, like complicit in genocide. So there's just a lot of like student activity regarding the Israel-Hamas conflict, and generally it seems to be more anti state of Israel than pro-Israel like sentiment. Ted, I'm sure you got some more.
The biggest there's been this like wave, this surge of these protests, and a lot of people have been arrested. But the biggest thing that jumped out about it to me is watching some of the man on the street style interviews of the people at these protests. It is absolutely absurd. If you go watch some of these videos, they're asking people what they're chanting. What does it mean? What does from the river to the sea mean? Like they don't even know what river or what sea they're talking about. They don't know that means getting rid of the state of Israel. They don't understand basic things about the conflict. There's a bunch of people that don't know like anything about the subject, but they're out there protesting. And it's just really shocking seeing those interviews, seeing people at a protest, but they don't understand what they're protesting about.
I'm not gonna I really do not care about either side. I don't think either of them are right.
It's more complicated
violence,
than
it's like everything is far more complicated than the Israelis are genociding the Palestinians, or the Palestinians are all Hamas terrorists. It's not cut and dried like that. It's a very complex area with complex conflicts and, no good answer in sight. I will say, if you're interested in learning more about like the historical roots of this, Daryl Cooper has a really, really great podcast on this called Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem. So that's the Martyr Made podcast. It's available on Spotify, pretty sure on YouTube as well. But it's probably one of the best like analyses of the Israel-Palestine conflict, like historically, that I've ever seen. He goes all the way back to like when the first
it's like 1806 or 1809
settlers, returned to Jerusalem and what is now the state of Israel. And then kind of goes through the British Empire's relationship with these Jewish settlers, and then how the U.S. took over, and the different political regimes, and like what the deals were that were made. Like this is a very, very long historic clash going on, and it's just, I don't know. It's just sad to see it come to this, but you can't say that it was like avoidable in a way. It's there have always been Jews in Jerusalem. There have always been Christians in Jerusalem. Not always, but like it's a really difficult conflict to like kind of pin down, because if you go back, it was the Canaanites originally. If you read the Old Testament, the Israelites came out of Egypt and killed all the Canaanites and took over Jerusalem. And then, they were kicked out by the Assyrians and the Babylonians. And then, the Romans came. And then after the Romans came, I think it was the Abyss. It was like one of the caliphates came in and took over Jerusalem, and then the Crusaders came and took over Jerusalem, and then to be honest, I'm not super familiar. I think it was under Turkish control for a long time, up until World War I, and then Turkish control. The Turkish Empire kind of dissolved, and that was at the same time that the Zionists were kind of slowly gaining more and more political power and control within Israel itself. So it's like, does Israel belong to the Canaanites? Does it belong to the Italians? Does it belong to the French? Like, everybody at some point has controlled it. So I really don't find any well, we were here first, as like, that's not really a valid argument in my opinion, because it has been such a contested piece of ground throughout all of recorded human history. So like, I don't really see that as a valid chain of reasoning to be like, this is why, we're the good guys. So I'm kind of, I guess, decidedly on the sidelines regarding this conflict, and like, who's right, I should say.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think it just kind of goes back to a famous, I think it's Reagan quote, but he said, "Nobody wins in a nuclear war." And it's kind of like the same thing here. Like, nobody wins here. Like, it's bad for everyone, but it's happening. And if you find yourself protesting for something that you don't really understand with a lot of hate and emotion, you should probably check yourself and try to learn more first.
Yeah. Go check out that podcast, Daryl Cooper. Martyr Made. Very, very good.
Okay. Yeah, like, the one thing I was going to say is that you obviously know a whole lot about this that I know, and you're saying on the sidelines, I know very little. And so, like, this is one of those things, like, I just don't even want to comment on. It's a conflict that has gone back, like, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of years. And, like, I just don't know enough to really have an opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Anything else we're covering? TikTok ban?
TikTok ban. Who put that in there? I think that was
Ted. Was me. Do we want to go into that at all, or?
Yeah. Can you lead into that? I know from what I read about it, it wasn't like specifically targeting TikTok. It just kind of gave the government more power in general over social media.
Yeah, that's one of the problems with it. It's
kind of a misnomer.
It doesn't say TikTok. It basically gives them access to shut down like anything. Like if they wanted to shut down Twitter, they could under this. So
because I know they've been like encouraging social media companies to censor stuff, but this would give them the actual power to censor it themselves.
No, it would give the government the power to shut down or force the sale of a social media company.
Okay.
So I don't know. Everyone says it's hard to get good information on this without reading the entire bill because everyone makes a lot of claims about it. It definitely is interesting that you see some congressmen buying a lot of Meta shares the day before the bill is introduced. We're going to get into this in a future episode.
Completely innocuous.
Yeah. We're going to do an episode on politicians trading / insider trading. They'll be coming out soon. But I think we can just maybe spend a couple minutes talking about TikTok and whether it's good or bad for people and whether the government should be able to get involved in that kind of stuff. I know Florida, Ron DeSantis, he's very liberal with his use of executive power for legislative means, which isn't very small government of him. But he made I think he signed it recently, but it doesn't allow anyone under the age of like 15 to use social media unless they have parental consent. I think then if you're 14 or 15, you can use it. And yeah, that was pretty interesting because we've gone before into some of Jonathan Haidt's work and how social media is really toxic to young people, especially like adolescent girls, really mentally harmful to them. So I don't know. What do you guys think about social media in general? And I guess the government getting involved in banning social media?
Well, like everything, it's complex. And I think the reason that the political right has consistently lost over the past several decades is because they have these, small government principles. And when, the other side does not balk at, using the full weight of the federal or state government to enforce their ways and get it on the books and, kind of build things. Whereas, the right is more like, hey, live and let live. You're inevitably going to lose because the left is actively shaping society in their own image. And yes, it's not small government of, what's his name? DeSantis to do this. But I think it is a step in the right direction because if you want to be a politically serious person, you have to do things. You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to leave everyone alone. Well, what's the point in electing you? And until the general society and general public are, a well-reasoned and, virtuous people as the Constitution calls for, you can't just live and let live. It's not, I don't think it's a feasible course of action in a society that is chaotic and, not doing too hot like we are. So I don't view it as a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, my view, like Ted, I consider myself very libertarian, and the way I kind of like to look at these things is like, while I agree social media is bad, and I don't think it would be a bad thing to ban it. If somebody who disagreed with me had that power, would I want them to have that kind of power? The answer is no, absolutely not. So
yes, but that's the thing is they do have that power and they are doing that. They just passed that TikTok bill, so it is the left doing that.
What?
So it doesn't matter.
Well, it's like both sides.
The people that you agree with going to use the power to do things that you agree with, or are you simply going to let the other team, whatever that may be, do whatever they want to you. That's kind of how I see it.
Both sides of Congress are pushing this issue, but
yeah, I also sorry.
I was also just going to say, like, this leads into an episode that we're going to be recording today. We're calling it. It's basically a book club episode on a book called The Liberty Amendments, and we're going to get into some proposed amendments we would add. But what Sean was saying earlier, with the Republicans say they're small government, but the problem is whenever Republicans are elected, you saw this with like Trump in a way, right? He gets in and then racks up the federal debt. We've talked about this before with Reagan, greatest president, conservatives of all time. Well, guess what? He also increased the federal debt. So they do these things where they make the government bigger, even though they're supposed to be small government. So until we get someone on the right, like Vivek has said he would do, but again, you never know because they all say they're going to reduce the size of the government. Until someone actually goes in there and just starts slashing and burning, the government's just going to keep growing. And as far as shifting the culture, like, I don't think it's necessarily the government's role to shift the culture. I think that has to be a movement led from the people. And at a certain point, you just got to say the pendulum will come around.
Yeah, I mean, I think the right is very authoritarian. I think there is although very small still, a larger small government sect within it. But I think they are very authoritarian overall, which is, I mean, basically what I was going to say. And like what I would say to you, Sean, is that they can put laws in place to prevent people from obtaining this kind of power, or so that the left can't do it.
Yeah, playing defense instead of just playing offense, going in a different direction.
I don't disagree that, really, I mean, at the federal level, both sides are kind of the same. But it's just that they're when it's the Republicans in charge, they're using that kind of, I guess you could say, authoritarian type stuff to just do stuff that doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect things. It doesn't, help preserve the government to be true to the Constitution or do anything like that. They're just mainly foreign policy, specifically with the neocons and, bolstering up, defense contractors and, other large industries. And then when the left comes in, it's mainly societal stuff. It's zoning laws. It's, what they call healthcare reform, stuff like that.
44.6% capital gains taxes.
Yeah, I mean, stuff like that destroys the ability of Americans to be entrepreneurs. When Obamacare was introduced, now you have to have healthcare. Like that is a massive expense that destroyed most people's ability to be self-employed.
Yeah.
It is a huge, huge expense. And now that's another thing you have to worry about. And a lot of small businesses were severely damaged by that. And I don't know. I am not very optimistic.
Yeah. The one thing I just want to add is bailouts. I can never support a bailout. And I feel like we saw it during COVID. The airlines were bailed out. I don't think too big to fail isn't. Maybe banks. Banks are a tough one. Airlines definitely are not too big to fail.
Sean,
I think you just let them all fail.
On our call the other night, Sean, you mentioned the growing euthanasia movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a symptom of society. Like I said, things are not doing too hot, and it's just we have I guess elective procedures like that at the beginning of life, and now people are essentially post-birth aborting themselves at any age they want. It's ridiculous. And within the U.S., I believe it's a little more restrictive. Like, you have to have a terminal diagnosis, but in Europe, in particular, it's pretty loose. Like there was this leading headline about a woman who's in her mid-20s who simply has anxiety and is getting euthanized. It's just sad. The society is very sick when the government is legalizing assisted suicide. Suicide has never been illegal per se, because you can't really put them in jail or fine them for committing suicide.
Attempting suicide is
I don't know. It's a very, very sad metric and a very sad state of affairs that is now legitimate legislation that's on the books.
And to be honest, I think it violates the Hippocratic Oath that doctors have to take.
100%.
You know,
I mean, that's not even a question.
Yeah,
you're ending someone's life deliberately.
Yeah, like that. I mean, any doctor who is semi-involved in that should have their license revoked.
100%. That's not like you do your best to alleviate pain and, like give people relief from whatever suffering they're going through, but you're certainly not going to end their life.
Mm.
Like a DNR is very, very different than assisted suicide. Assisted suicide is you being like, yeah, kill me. And a DNR is just like, hey, if I die, don't bring me back.
Yeah, I think
two very different things,
Yeah.
And one is morally okay, and the other is, abysmally amoral.
Yeah, I think that gets into like that famous trolley ethical dilemma a little bit, which we can talk about sometime as well.
I don't know if if there's really any in between gray area with assisted sua. Pretty black.
Well, that's no. I don't think there is either. But if you apply a similar circumstance to like another, or if you look at it through the same lens in a similar circumstance, your opinion may change. And it's just a nice thought experiment to explain why it's different for similar situations.
We're losing Sean on the Zoom here, so I think we'll end this episode here on the current events. But we will be back next week with what is the next episode? Fast food and heavy metals. A pretty shocking episode that Nick and I went into some lab analysis of some foods. All right. We'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining us today at Weights and Wealth, and don't forget to apply today's lessons to live healthy and wealthy.
If this conversation will contribute to your fitness and financial gains, please share it with a friend or family member and give a 5-star review so more people can lift bigger weights and get bigger bank accounts.